Donovan, thank you very much for agreeing to be a normal person talking to me about one particular chapter inside of a collection of chapters that is being referred to as Project 2025. Part of the reason that I felt compelled to have normal people conversations about each individual chapter is that I feel, I'm going to use some language from Project 2025, that us leftist, extremist, Marxist agenda having people are mostly only focusing on the severely important, dramatic civil rights impacts of the ideas from Project 2025. I also think I am a person who is very on top of government, congressional legislation, etc. And there are departments and agencies I did not know even existed that are being targeted specifically in chapters. So we are taking one chapter at a time. Today, Kate, you stupidly agreed to read Section 1, Chapter 3, the Central Personnel Agencies Managing the Bureaucracy.
And in opposition to you, I don't know a ton about the government. And I mean, I know the basics and I know how it works. I probably know a little tiny bit more than the average American and a lot less than even my husband, who is a naturalized citizen and knows a lot more about this than I do.
Yeah, we were just
So
born here. He had to take a test.
Yeah, he had to take it. Well, and he has 2 master's degrees in international relations and political science. So he's just more aware. At one point, he was like, "Yeah, but that's not how your government works." And I was like, "Wait, what?"
Well, interestingly, I don't know if those master's degrees would help or not help
Well,
chapter 3.
yeah, so chapter 3, I had to go through this a couple of times to understand what I was reading. And I think of all the chapters, because I've read some other bits and pieces of this along the way as this has become more popular. This chapter, if you don't dive too deep into it, is I think fairly innocuous. Fairly. Like there's not a lot of, like, to me, big danger things here. Like they're basically saying these are the people that run the government. There's all these different departments that take care of the people that run the government. There's like the people that you if you have an appeal or something and you want to fight back, you go to this department. And if you work for, so and so, then you're in this department. It's just like this is the group of people that oversee the people that work in government. It's like the HR of government, kind of.
Okay.
Right.
I would argue, and
Mm-hmm.
this is part of the reason I wanted to have it as a conversation and not just me
Yeah.
pontificating. But what is, as we will note in all of the conversations, there are
Yeah.
some interesting, I'm going to go Princess Bride. You keep using this word. I don't think you know what this word means, right?
Right. Yeah.
So the alarming factors that I think might get some people's attention is the idea that is shows up in a lot of the chapters that there is in support of nonpartisan civil servants, which is language that is typically used to describe a government employee. But they are fundamentally altering, alternative fact style, the definition of what nonpartisan means.
Mm.
So the idea of nonpartisan that I'm understanding, specifically in chapter 3, which I do think is alarming, is that if you are a Democrat or liberal, you are not nonpartisan.
I did
And
not pick that up. Okay.
frankly, I would agree with that. Like, if you're
Right.
nonpartisan civil servants are not supposed to bring their personal politics into work, right? It's
Yeah.
supposed to be a kind of a neutral place, just do your job. Um, Interestingly, though, is that by repealing, putting back in Trump's executive orders following Schedule F, we're actually re-invoking the Reagan personnel is policy, very conservative policy, which is nonpartisan, basically means you don't disagree with the presidential agenda.
Well, so that yes, so that's the part that is worrying. But on top of that, the things that are worrying in here are like we have a hard time getting rid of people in the past, so we're going to make it easier to get rid of people. I think that part is also really alarming. They're
Right.
like if you don't fall into these categories, we're just going to eliminate your position, and we're going to make it much easier to eliminate you as in your job or the position as it stands, because it doesn't align with those factors, right? So
Right.
I think that that's like, I think that if you read this without any of the undertone of the rest of the document, you'd be like, this totally makes sense.
Mhm.
Hire people based on merit, get rid of people that are wasting resources, get rid of overlapping positions so that we're again wasting resources. Um, like make sure, what was the other thing that it was like, well, that, I mean, without a deeper level, yeah, totally makes sense.
Sure. Until you
And
realize,
oh, and don't pay them well. Basically, it's
okay,
like
get rid of all those great benefits. Right.
get rid of most of their benefits, because they should be like, this is one of those sort of a belief that's strong sort of in the nonprofit sector too, right? Like you're doing something you believe in and therefore you shouldn't need money for it, which is awkward.
Right.
Like
No one needs money.
no one needs money or benefits.
Which is why we should totally reduce the budget of the US Secret Service, but get rid of its financial obligations, but put it in more of a protection law enforcement, really emphasis on the law enforcement side,
Yeah.
and just move it to ICE, right? Like
Yes.
the there's a million undercurrents that are fascinating, and the consistent drumbeat that is anti-abortion,
Yeah.
anti-trans related anything, and
Yeah.
anti the broadest definition possible of what immigration might mean
Yes.
shows up everywhere. So
Yes.
inside of a chapter about personnel benefits of nonpartisan civil servant federal employees, it was a nice little reprieve that abortion and trans related
Right.
didn't show up.
Which is
Um,
what I meant in the beginning when I said, like, compared to some of the other things, this feels like a little bit like
right.
less of an attack, if because it doesn't have those big pieces, and if you don't know the undertone, you're kind of like, well, yeah, we should be able to get rid of people that are underperforming, and we should be able to get rid of overlapping positions, and we should, and then there's the part that you said we should talk about,
The
that
marriage
the
part.
merit system.
Yes. Okay.
And it says a merit system is used to hire people based on their skills and not just personal connections, which like,
So this is a very interesting conversation point that I would love to be able to have a conversation with people who are have different working definitions of what these words mean, because I am obviously also missing something. So if we stick with personnel is policy and it is merit based. I was on a podcast a week ago or so, and the person invited me on their podcast, and we engaged in a conversation about meritocracy, where I did my best, right? Of like, you are being hypocritical on your own podcast, sir. So I used Trump's current cabinet appointments or nominees
right.
as an example, right? And so a lot of times, what and I'm going to throw in some David Brooks. There was a great article in the Atlantic of how the Ivy League broke America.
Hmm.
So can I be a nerd for a second?
Amen. Please do.
Just a second though, then I'll flash right back to non-nerd. No. So the idea of merit that entered higher education basically was that the people who previously had access to higher education, Ivy League education, etc., were absolutely family based.
Yeah.
So kind of the networking piece that's
Yeah.
mentioned in this chapter, I
Yeah.
want people to kind of think about like the Buckingham Palace, right?
Yeah.
Is that you just happen to be born into a family and you get these benefits. So I just realized that this kind of echoes to people who were actually born in the United States and became US citizens, right? Let's get rid of all of this. I wonder if there's some parallel thing happening. I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, so instead of your social power or clout getting you access to education, you should be able Anybody should be able to prove that they are of this. This even comes, we maybe some shadows of W.B. Du Bois' talented 10th, right? Is that higher education may not be for everybody, but that talented 10th could come from anywhere. So it opens up that opportunity, which is how, according to David Brooks and basically academic scholars, education became a rat race related to how many languages does your high school graduate speak? Do they also play harp and yacht and raise some rare form of tomatoes? Because the more well-rounded,
On a volunteer basis.
right, 100%. The more well-rounded and obscure interests, the more likely your application is going to stand out. So I 100% can see how that is weird. That is not your
Yeah.
average situation, right? So these kind of
And
like,
still requires privilege.
yeah, absolutely. And money and time.
Right.
So the language and admissions, this is usually referred to as a spiky application because they kind of spike out and stand out a little bit. Okay, let's just take that information that's floating around in my brain and put it to the side. Okay, so now on this podcast, I was told that a meritocracy was somebody who has skills that is not necessarily like working up the ranks, but could be coming from the outside that has skills that are needed for the job. For the record, I think it's a great idea to hire people who have skills that are related to a job. That sounds amazing. So then I, in an attempt to be charitable in the podcast, used Trump's cabinet and nominees as an example. And then I said in like a admissions kind of font, we
Yeah.
would call these transferable skills.
Right.
Now, to your point, and then I'm going to shut up because I want to hear what you have to say. The biggest transferable skill that I charitably can say is in existence amongst the current nominees and appointees is the transferable skill of loyalty. And if we are using loyalty as Roman numeral 1 in all of these job descriptions, side note, not the most nonpartisan stance.
Right.
But okay, so loyalty is the first transferable skill. Then it is helpful to my extremist, leftist, Marxist, agenda-based brain to see that that is the transferable skill that is giving these candidates their merit to be appointed to this position. Loyalty, I am Slytherin. I'm all about loyalty, but it is not Roman numeral 1 for a job. It is Roman numeral number 1 for friendship.
Yeah.
For people I keep in my life. But the when I used that as an example, the podcaster compared this to the opposite of affirmative action. And that affirmative action is hiring someone because of a demographic trait. And you only hire them because of this. So I said, well, is it possible that someone who happens to have this demographic trait could also have merit-based qualities or transferable skills? So I'm not lying. The podcaster told a story of how he hired a vice president for his business who is a woman. And I was like, say it ain't so.
Wow.
And he's like, yeah, she's a photographer and she's a really good writer. And those are skills I didn't have. So then they balanced out my skills. Plus, she's a woman. So I said, you hired based on your weaknesses someone to balance out leadership of your organization. To me, that does sound like merit-based. But the fact that you are also pointing out that she is a woman is doing what you think affirmative action is doing. And that's not what I see. I don't tell people the demographic information as to why I hired someone. If anything, maybe it's seen as like a bonus, right? But if loyalty is first, then maybe it's a bonus they can type.
Yeah.
I'm trying really hard. Thoughts?
Yeah, trying really hard. And I think the idea of merit is automatically leads to some trouble because like the same way that it does with admissions in school, because people will put on a song and dance to improve their merit. But if the merit is loyalty, we all know, maybe not, we all know, because you and I work in organizations that are having maybe some culture issues or maybe some other things, we know that when loyalty is to a person is at the top of the list, then we are diminishing creativity, we're diminishing like people's ability to really show up at work, we're diminishing innovative thinking, we're diminishing. So that type of loyalty isn't actually beneficial to all of us in the long run, and I think that that's important to understand. Like, you don't want people fighting secret battles behind your back in your office or in government, but you do need to have people that are willing to stand up and say, hey, actually this is not quite it. So I think that's the big danger of using this system and using loyalty as the major measure. And this was the biggest reason that I was looking at this thinking like, this is the scary part of this to me, the scariest part. Because if you just look at it, like I said, you just look at this thing, it says, you hire and keep workers fairly, you use a merit system, you don't overlap too many jobs, like everyone, not everybody will get rated as successful if their job isn't successful. Like there's, if you don't meet your KPIs, then, like you get put on a PIP or whatever, like fine. But that undertone of the loyalty comes first, the inherent lack of questioning and pushback comes second, because that comes after loyalty in this governmental view.
Right. I think where we, as anybody who's ever had a job,
Yeah.
which is not everybody, right? But
No.
like if you've ever had a job, I can't think of a job where I don't have some kind of critique. If
Of
we
course.
needed to cut budget, we needed to cut bureaucracy where bottlenecks happen. If we like, I remember when I hired my first assistant, I reached out to my other 1099s and I was just like, hey, I think I'm going to hire an assistant. I just thought I'd ask, are there any tasks that any of you are currently doing that you don't want to be doing, or that like scope creeped over the years and you're doing it, but you don't want to be doing it, that you would want to give this new assistant so I can make sure that I'm putting it in job description, right? Is that I'm asking the people who are doing the stuff. They had like 70 things.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh,
Oh,
and I didn't know, right? And so
right.
the strength that it takes in an employer or supervisor to listen to where the bureaucracy is coming from, etc. I think you're totally right. At first glance, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, yeah. I mean, sure. I don't. I mean, then there's like weird things like eliminate the Office of Intelligence and Analysis. I didn't even know there was an Offices of Intelligence and Analysis.
Yeah.
So either that is like redundant, hypocritical,
Right. Is that overlapping or
possibly relevant
oh,
intelligence, and it's got a great title, right? But
right.
like, if we just eliminate it, what work is it doing? And
And
then
where is
where is
that
that work
going?
going? Right. Yeah. So, right. So inside of what is being examined around work, I just want to make sure that everybody knows this. So when we talk about personnel as policy, that's the Reagan motivation. And it's important to mention that the authors come out of Reagan Bush
Yeah.
years, right? Another thing that I think is very interesting is that I hear a lot about how the ideas in Project 2025 are new. And if they're not new, then how they're like mirroring Nazi Germany, right? Well, first off, Nazi Germany mirrored Jim Crow and Indian law. So like we're responsible for this. But it is also the case that Project 2025 was written after Carter. And
Right.
Carter is the one who actually, at least in like modern times, who actually started looking at like bureaucracy, et cetera. And it set Reagan up to be the Reagan of the conservatives. So like
Yeah.
people, context, it matters, right? So in this chapter, Managing Bureaucracy, we are looking primarily at civil servants, which is the fancy term for nonpartisan federal employees. I'm laughing there. But it's looking at hiring, recruiting, training, promotion, retention, demotion, transfer, evaluation, appraisal of the position, and or whether or not there is in fact discrimination.
Yeah.
How,
And none of it leads to any clarity around how any of these practices would actually work.
because I'm assuming loyalty means lockstep.
Right. So
Mm.
when you read through all the sections, it's like, well, yeah, okay, got it, got it, got it. But then they're like, well, it's based on merit and we can get rid of people if they're performing poorly. And you're like, yeah, but what else?
Yeah.
Well, because it
So,
kind of repeats those same things in different words in every paragraph.
yeah,
So
totally.
then you're like, well, then what else are we using to make these decisions?
Right.
And why are you spending so much time writing about this if you keep saying the same thing?
But see, that's the piece that I think is key. So the same thing. So now let's put the civil rights lens on top of it.
Yeah.
If meritocracy means that I can put in someone with outside skills who didn't necessarily like work up the ladder to the job, loyalty is what is being
Rewarded.
prioritized, right? Then the people who are working in a civil rights office, we can reduce the size. We can also take away their independent authority,
Yeah.
and we can stick someone in who's in congruence with the presidential agenda, which is actually taking the nonpartisan way. Same thing goes with
Away.
the intelligence community. You don't want it to have a brain of its own. You want it to be in lockstep. When we immigration is in every chapter, I'm pretty sure, but to be able to eliminate offices that are actually supporting DACA applicants or illegal aliens, I don't like that term, but undocumented people to go through the process to legally become a citizen, let's make that impossible.
Yes.
Right? That's not eliminating bureaucracy. That's actually cutting doorways so that your agenda can hold.
Which is what they want.
Right. Right.
And then
But it's
uh,
mixed in the language. So you're like, yeah, I don't like bureaucracy.
right.
But that assisting a refugee is not necessarily guaranteed bureaucracy. I'm sure that there's
Right.
duplication in
But
there.
people believe that it is.
Right.
And
Right.
this is something that we've talked about a lot in our household because my husband is a naturalized citizen. So he came here with me and we did it quote unquote the right way.
So proud of you.
Whatever, yeah, like whatever bullshit that means. And doing it the right way required an incredible amount of privilege.
Mhm.
Incredible amount. The cost of the right lawyers. And my husband was moved here. We had been married for 12 years. I had already gotten a Polish citizenship. So we had been through the questioning of our marriage and all that. Like we'd been through that already.
In
Um,
Poland.
in Poland, yep. And then when we came here, we couldn't just fill out an application and be like, well, we've already sort of done like a lot of this stuff and here's, all the different proof and we didn't get married last week. We've been married for over a decade. And it was still like a 2.5, 3 year process. When my husband was brought here by a company and had a job and had a good income and blah, blah, blah. And so this part is something that we talk about a lot, that it's like, a lot of people that we know that did something similar get to the point where they get in, they check mark themselves as citizens, and then they're like, screw the rest of y'all.
Mhm.
I did it the right way, so that means that everything else should fall away. And my husband is like, it's impossible for most people to do it the right way.
Right.
The quote unquote right way.
Right.
It's if anybody really knew what it actually takes to go through this process in this country and how much money it costs and how many different pieces of paperwork you have to fill out and how if you get one thing wrong in one square in one box, you are screwed and have to start completely over again. Like it's such a grueling process.
Mhm. So then what I think is the theme that I am very much appreciating, and thank you for sharing about your own journey through this, right? Is that streamlining bureaucracy is language I think most people would get behind.
Right. Here's
People
the
who,
common
yeah, people who have experienced any government office bureaucracy is going to be like, yeah, to chapter 3.
right.
But then inside of what
Exactly.
streamlining means is aligning to one president's agenda. And I want to be really clear. It's not just that I don't necessarily support Trump's agenda. I wouldn't want these offices to be aligned
With
to
any singular president
with
ever.
any singular president. Number one, imagine working in a place where every 2 to 4 years, maybe 8 years, the agenda swings.
Yeah.
What a nightmare workplace that would be. And that to me is why my definition of nonpartisan really matters in civil service. So then there's some little nuances. And then I want to start talking about things that we need to talk about and
Okay.
what these mean. And maybe some of these nuances will be those things. So inside of this chapter about eliminating bureaucracy, which again, to your point, I think your average person would be like, yeah, save us money. That sounds great. But
Yeah.
we're not necessarily saving money. We are changing how easy it is to remove someone and replace them with someone where the number one thing is loyalty. That's important to
Yes.
mention. So, number one, for housing, and a lot of this information, I highly recommend Stop the Coup does really great summaries of all the chapters too. So I want to cite my sources. Housing, only US citizens would lawfully be permanent residents. I'm sorry, only US citizens and permanent residents that are lawful, that's the thing, can live in federal subsidized housing. So anyone living currently in federal subsidized housing, one thing I think that would be important to do is that you likely do not have to go around and constantly prove that you're either a lawful permanent resident or a US citizen. There are people who are probably in your neighborhood that don't have that documentation and are lawful or US citizens. So one of the things you might want to do is like help those people pull that paperwork together so that they have it readily available if they're going to have to prove their citizenship or their lawfulness of being able to be in federal housing. Otherwise, they're going to be removed. Education, denying US loans to non-US citizens, denying it to lawful permanent residents. So they can live in federal housing, but they can't receive any kind of US loan towards education. Denying US loans to students at schools that provide in-state tuition to undocumented people, which could include DACA.
Right.
Right? So these are little
And for
details.
those of you who don't know what DACA is,
Yeah, go ahead.
right? So DACA is a child that was brought to the United States, quote unquote, illegally, but has lived their entire life here, does not have any true real connection to their country of birth, and have spent their whole entire education in this country. Like they literally, if you sent them back, they would literally have no idea where to go, what to do, or maybe even how to speak the language. And
Or
so there is a
not even have
program.
family contacts wherever
No,
it is.
they might not even have family contacts, right? So there is a program to help these children become citizens or at least be permanent residents so that they can lawfully, legally go to school and continue their educations and work towards a citizenship, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So, and I don't know if I missed this, but I missed this part completely. I didn't even read this part.
It's
But,
because it's barely a sentence. It's not a subject heading. It's just wormed in
oh, got it.
how the streamlining would impact.
Right. And
Right.
so as someone who grew up, my hometown was over 50% immigrants where I grew up. And most of them were from the Azores at that time. So but my hometown has been an immigrant town since forever because it was a textile town. But at some point in the country, almost all of the cotton that was cotton textile that was made to create three-piece suits was produced in the city that I grew up in for the entire country. So there was a lot of factories. So we always needed new workers. So we had these immigrant workers coming in, working in the factories, whatever. So I grew up in a place where I knew a ton of people that were undocumented. I knew a ton of people that we couldn't survive without. I knew a ton of people that didn't speak English. There's entire streets in my hometown where you go to restaurants, none of the menus are in English. They're only in Portuguese.
Mhm.
And so these are my friends
Mhm.
that we're talking about
Right.
that grew up here that have never even been to the Azores or to Portugal, a lot of them.
Mhm.
speak Portuguese to their parents, but if they go to Portugal, people are like, what are you, that's not like,
Right.
that doesn't sound right.
American version.
It's their Americanized version of Portuguese. So this, I don't like it.
Yeah, no, it's not good. And I want to use it as an example. The inside of a chapter about eliminating bureaucracy, where I'm like, all right, yeah. Then there are these little hidden gems.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest currents of these gems is directly impacting immigration. So, a couple more. So, labor, let's take some of those people that you were just talking about working in fabric producing factories.
Yeah. Yeah.
This chapter also snuck in to eliminate the lowest two levels of the four levels of wages that foreign workers can earn. So foreign workers that have a visa to work here have four different categories of wage earning. So by eliminating the two lowest ones, even legally allowed people to work here will not be able to have those lower level jobs. Okay, I don't really know what that has to do with streamlining and bureaucracy, but here we are. And then the last one is equalizing taxes between American citizens and working visa holders quickly. I think it's important to mention that I believe taxes are not based on who is paying them.
They're
They're
not.
based on income. So this is already
Yes.
a little questionable to me, but I'm not an accountant. And then all the information related to taxes for undocumented people has to be released immediately to help facilitate their deportation.
Oh no.
That is inside this chapter
And I
about,
missed it.
yeah, sure, streamlining and no more bureaucracy. Sure. All right, sounds good. Then one of the little things that I've been doing in a pink pen in my notes is, excuse me, what are you doing here? And that is, there is one statement that is deferring to the experts. So once you put the merit-based loyalist into these positions who are loyal to the president's agenda, then the underlings need to defer to their deference. I am curious, and I was a ceramics major, so I don't know, but the Supreme Court case that overturned Chevron decision, which relied on the EPA instead of Chevron executives to determine what is actually an environmental impact. That's what deference to the expert meant. And I'm saying past tense because they overturned it. So
Yeah.
inside this chapter, we're supposed to defer to experts, except we're no longer supposed to defer to experts.
Except and what who an expert is, we're back to the merit conversation. The
Loyalist.
expert is the loyalist, not necessarily the expert. And that goes back in line with the rest of the language in the chapter that says like must be in accordance with the president, must be in alignment with the president, must be in agreement with the president.
Right.
So the expert as a loyalist also has to agree with the president's agenda and push the president's agenda.
Yes. All right. Last thing I'm going to point out in my notes to eliminate previous attempts to eliminate and eliminate bureaucracy was to move from full-time employed civil servants to contractors.
Which they don't want us to do as small business owners.
Correct. Correct, because they need the taxes and the payroll income. So there are more contractors working for the federal government than there are full-time employees now.
Yes, I did see that. Yeah.
Yeah. But we don't have to give contractors benefits.
Right.
But the contract can't be voided inside of its working dates. So not only is the loyalist based person who's being inserted replacing a civil servant who has been in the position and may possibly have some relevant expertise of that particular job. But they also have the ability to eradicate contractors at whim at any time, because another drum beat, right, is that we're getting rid of unions.
Right.
So federal
Yeah.
workers should not be unionized,
Yeah.
according to the chapter.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a lot for 20 plus pages. There's a lot of stuff covered. And I think it's a really good example of you need to read it, but you need to read it on this.
I read it 3 times
Yeah.
and I still missed things.
And you sent it through the chat GPT.
And I sent it through ChatGPT.
Yeah. Explain it to me like I'm a fifth grader.
Yes.
And there is still stuff hidden in there that's missing.
Yeah.
But the stuff that's in there that's missing, that I am missing as well, are the consistent drum beats, right?
Yeah.
So if we start talking about regular coffee talk, things to have a conversation with over dinner for people who might actually be listening to this conversation. Hi, by the way. I think it's really important for people to understand the severity that whatever category of non-US citizen, and I'm even going to say your husband could qualify for this, even though he now has citizenship. But if you got citizenship because both of your parents were citizens and then you were born here, right? Like what I would call my accidental US citizenship. Nobody was paying attention. I just got it.
Yeah.
If you are not that category, you need to, one, keep your papers with you.
Yeah.
To really understand education loans, housing opportunities, employment opportunities, and how this is going to impact your taxes. And you need to have a conversation and tell other people. Because I think you brought up a really good point, Kate, that if a delineation of what type of new to being a US citizen, if we can get those groups all fighting against each other, we're over here, and I'm saying we, like I've never paid attention to my US citizenship until I had to get a passport. And I was like, oh wow, look at this. Fancy, fancy, right? If we can make those groups fight amongst themselves,
which is not hard.
Not hard at all, because some people used a really expensive, very slow, very hard, arduous process. And other people had children here.
Well, well, here's the thing. I think the arduous process is true for everybody. It's just a different arduous process based on, I mean, like my husband didn't have to, decide to pay a mule to help him get across a border and spend weeks on foot wondering whether or not he was going to make it.
Correct.
Right? Like his arduous process was, so I don't think that anybody else's process is less arduous. I think it's just less clear what the steps are and more difficult to obtain if you don't have, like, we are two people with multiple degrees that speak multiple languages. We can read the forms and understand what they mean.
Right.
Right? Like we can do, and we can we can afford to hire a lawyer to help us through it if we don't want to read the forms and do, like, so those things, they're a pain in the ass, but we can make them happen. And other people that are coming into the country are going through different, more physical, arduous processes.
Right. Well, I guess I want to make sure that I'm also talking to the people who don't go through any of these processes.
Yeah.
You know what's less arduous? Not having to think about it.
Yeah.
Taking my US citizenship completely for granted.
But you do have to think about it now.
Right. I do have to think about it now, not because I'm endangered.
Right.
Because I don't believe
well but here's why I think the other reason that we have to think about it is because one of the things that people don't understand about this whole idea that we're just going to like start deporting people left and right is that if we deport, say, 2 million people, which we have that many undocumented people in the country easily. So if we decided tomorrow to deport 2 million people, first of all, the cost of deporting them would be astronomical, because we're paying ICE and law enforcement and whoever else that we're paying as part of this process to round people up basically and find them and check their papers and do all that. So first we have the personnel expense that we have to consider. And then we have to think about also the loss of work. Like you're saying, people can work at different levels and all of that. Like, do you know how expensive broccoli's about to get? If we don't have people picking it and chopping it? Like, do any of us have any idea that not only are our expenses gonna go up because of the cost of actually putting this plan into play, but also once these people are gone, we're screwed.
Yeah. I know broccoli does not naturally occur in little bite-sized pieces in a plastic bag. Did you know
It's
that?
wild.
I know, so strange. Um,
Strawberry doesn't come frozen in a bag either.
what?
I know.
Oh my God. I do think that it is important for me, probably to survive, to bring some sense of humor to this, but I do really want to get to, okay, so alarm bell off. What
Yeah.
do I do?
Yeah.
So
Keep your
no,
papers with you, number one.
yeah, number one, I would keep your papers with you. I also think those of us that don't ever, when I lived in Arizona, when the bill passed, now I'm forgetting the bill number because it was a number of years ago, where anybody could be pulled over basically for being
Yeah.
brown while driving.
Yeah.
So one of the acts of resistance that I suggested at that time when I lived in Arizona was that all of us keep our IDs with us, because I called it little black dress privilege. And
Yeah.
that, like, there are times I drive without my driver's license
Yeah.
because the likelihood of me getting pulled over is none. So I think one thing that we can do is keep our paperwork on us and show it everywhere. Like, show people what you are doing with your paperwork, not to shame someone else, but to
Yeah.
highlight that this is absurd because no one would ask me about my citizenship. I
Yeah.
think that's real, like, ally advocate kind of work that we can do to draw attention to the pressure that people are being put through that are not me, to show that paperwork.
Yeah.
I also think that we can reach out in whatever profession we are in, or whatever career, whatever job we have. If there is a union supporting that job, um, getting involved in supporting the union, because I think unions that are very much under attack will be able to be the best support for people who get caught in the ambiguity of this word does not mean what you think this word means that you keep using. And if you don't have a union, I think our professional organizations
Yeah.
have to step up and support. Now, you and I both belong to the same professional organization, and I don't see them stepping up, but they might if enough of us say we have to do this because we have
Yeah.
to protect our fellow community members.
Well, yeah, and I think in addition to like adding to that layer would be being involved in your local nonprofits that support
Yep.
various people. Like this is the next stage of that because there are so many incredibly passionate nonprofits that are doing all sorts of work to help protect people that are about to get their funding cut, that are about to have some real serious issues. So if you can get involved on that level, then that might be a place where you can really make some shift.
Right. I do think that enough people who might listen to this could be employed in something that is needing to be streamlined and probably has some redundancy or some
Yeah.
bureaucracy as well. And I think possibly, I'm really shooting for the moon here, but possibly inside your own organizations, having a conversation of what the difference between streamlining and bureaucracy and lockstep means.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate Kate, and of course you brought this up right at the top, is that a healthy group disagrees with each other. It
Yeah.
brings multiple opinions in, keeps a conversation going to be creative and innovative. And we can actively seek those opportunities, make those opportunities happen, and highlight the importance of those. In my new book, I talk about celebrating failure,
Yeah.
because well-intended failures in the right direction are fantastic, right?
Yeah.
So fostering that almost expectation to be part of your existing workplaces, your friend groups, your family
Yeah.
groups, keeping our curiosity and generosity skills honed and alive, I think is also another act of resistance that we could easily do.
Yeah. I agree.
What else comes up for you as either conversation points or things that we need to be doing relevant to, quote, managing bureaucracy?
I think we need to, I think most of us need to start understanding which branches of government are actually affecting our everyday lives. And if that means going into your local offices, because this is what I think what people need to know is that this is not just about Washington, D.C.,
Right.
right?
No,
This is
state
ev-
and your local
this
municipalities.
is state and local as well. So I think that if we're saying one of the biggest, scariest messages in here, and that we've said a couple of times, is like everybody needs to be in agreement with the president. So, there are plenty of places where that's automatically not true because we have senators, mayors, et cetera, that are on the other side. But this is going to be the push. If this is the push, then this is the push. So understanding how your local government affects you, I think a lot of people sort of blink this away and don't really pay much attention to their local government. We know that voting is a lot lower at the local government level, but I think that understanding how your local government affects you and what decisions are being made, like go to your town hall meeting, find out what's being said in your town, like understand what's happening in your local space, because you're probably not going to change things that are happening in Washington. But if you can be like a one dissenting voice in your space, you might be the person that encourages people to stay open. And
Yeah.
that's important.
And I think that's an excellent point. Keeping dissent alive.
Yeah.
I'm going to go one step further. Seeking dissent.
Yeah.
If you are a decision maker of any kind, I encourage you to create a culture of who disagrees with me.
Yeah.
Like,
And
how can
why?
I make this better? And legitimately mean it.
Yeah.
You're not seeking people out to fire them because they disagree with you, but to keep that ability to engage in a conversation, I think is important. Um,
Yeah.
this is me nerding out again, assuming I have stopped since the last proclamation. But one of the things I've really struggled with is my friends who are just stupefied into inaction
Yeah.
because somewhere they heard or read or got the impression or something that the majority of the United States would support a doctrine like this.
Right.
And I really want people to hear that 60% of eligible voters in the United States voted in the presidential election. And that's considered great. Like
Yeah.
that's
That's a
amazing.
good turnout.
60%, not
Yeah.
100% of
Yeah.
eligible voters. And there's a lot of people in the United States who are not eligible voters. That's a different chapter, foreshadowing. So 60% of the people who are eligible to vote voted. The vast majority of the people who did actually vote did not vote for this doctrine.
Right.
This meaning Project 2025. I'm pointing to my monitor in case people are unclear as to what I'm pointing to. More than 50% of the people voted for a candidate that was strongly against this doctrine and or libertarian or third party candidates, right? So that in itself is what democracy is about, is that Trump legally, fair and square won this election.
Yeah.
Great. Not attesting that. Knock yourself out.
Right.
And between the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the Supreme Court, the judicial branch, those three branches of government should not be in 100% alignment with each other. When I remember when Obama was first elected, we the Democrats had control of the House and the Senate, and people wanted him to just jam through a bunch of different things because he could. And one of the things I respect about him so much is that he didn't do that because that's not how government's supposed to work.
Right.
It's supposed to be bipartisan. It's supposed to be collaborative because you get better ideas that way.
Yeah.
Whatever we can do at our dinner tables and our coffee breaks that keeps that push pull of ideas, that is actually keeping democracy alive.
Which means you have to allow the push pull even if you're on the side that agrees with us. Like that means that unless someone is causing harm, which could happen, part of your job is to learn how to continue to have those
Yeah,
conversations that you disagree with.
absolutely. And
Imperfectly.
I'm gonna call out my extremist leftist Marxist agenda holding liberal, pinko, commies, socialist, Democrat, liberals.
Yeah.
It is very easy to just unfriend people.
Yes.
For some of us with time and means and the ability to understand forms, it's very easy to apply for second citizenship someplace else.
Yeah.
And I'm going to invite, there was a TikTok the other day that said, for the next 4 years, can we all agree to airport rules? And I was kind of like, what does that even mean? And I'm on airplanes all the time. And what I realized is that coexistence isn't a goal because we're already coexisting. We're already on the same plane, heading to the same destination, whether we like it or not. Can we behave? And that expectation of civility and decorum has not necessarily been articulated, has not necessarily been written down. And we generally understand what that means or doesn't mean. And I would encourage people to realize that. And two, as much as I say coexistence is not a goal, I think some people on my side of the spectrum need to make it a goal because they have checked out. And we need to be able to engage in discourse. I say that as someone who potentially could be dramatically impacted by some of the civil rights pieces, you as well, and your family. And if at risk, we can hold space for dissent, we are actually keeping democracy alive.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the biggest act of resistance that we could think of.
Amen.
Amen. Parting words, Kate Donovan the Fabulous.
When it feels too big, go smaller.
When it feels too big, go smaller. That's a really great way to land streamlining and bureaucracy. See what I
did there?
Oh my gosh. Okay, section 1, chapter 3. The world we live in. Here we are. And I really appreciate the conversation and your thoughtfulness. I wish you friendship and raucous disagreement over coffee.
Right back at you.